A gute Woche and a freilichen Chaneke. This afternoon the Rebbe began Farbrengen regarding the Kriyas HaTorah of Chaneke. That in Chaneke we read from the Torah, from Parshas Nosoi, we read exactly how the Nesiim were makriv the Korbanos when the Nesiim, each and every one of them, brought their korban at the Chanukas HaMishkan, and the Torah tells us in detail regarding what every korban was of every Nasi, of every Shevet. And this is what we read in the Kriyas HaTorah of Chanukah. Because Chanukah is also the Chanukas, the rededication of the Mizbeach. That's what happened on Chanukah, of the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why it's appropriate that this is what we read in Chanukah, the Kriyas HaTorah of the Korbanos which the Nesiim brought by the Chanukas HaMishkan. However, the specialty of this year regarding other years is that this year Chanukah began on a Sunday, exactly the same way as when the Chanukas HaMishkan, when the Nesiim then began to bring the Korbanos. They began to bring their Korbanos on a Sunday. That's when they began the dedication of the Mishkan. And now by us as well, Chanukah began on Sunday. So the same Seder, as it was then, it is now. The same Nasi that we read on Sunday, that was the Nasi that was Makriv the Korban on Sunday. What we read this Chanukah on Monday, that was the Korban which that specific Nasi, the second Nasi, brought on the second day and so forth. Until we come to Shabbos. Regarding Shabbos, Rabbi mentioned, there's a discussion, it's brought in a Medrash, if they were permitted to bring these Korbanos on Shabbos or not. Shabbos, we know, we can only bring a Korban Tzibur. They brought Korbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. However, the Korbanos which they brought in the Beis HaMikdash were all public Korbanos on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Let's take, for example, the Korban Tamid. Korban Tamid, which was brought daily, was also brought on Shabbos. So this is a Korban Tamid which is representing Klal Yisrael, or the specific Korbanos which they had to bring for Shabbos, the special Korbanos which they brought on Shabbos. But again, it was a Korban Tzibur. This Korban, a public Korban, this Korban, however, which you bring as each leader, as each Nasi of every Shevet, this is actually individual Korban. This is a Korban Yochid. And a Korban Yochid we do not bring on Shabbos. But nonetheless, the Medrash tells us that these Korbanos, this series of Korbanos which they brought when they dedicated the Mishkan, there was an exception made, and the Nasi, whose turn was to be Makriv the Korban on Shabbos, was Makriv the Korban on Shabbos also. Which Nasi was Makriv the Korban on Shabbos? Again, the same Nasi which we read in the Torah today. In the Kriyas HaTorah of today, what we read in the second Sefer Torah, which we read, the Kriya that has a Shaychus to Chanukah, it's the 7th day, Bayoim Hashvi, who brought Nasi Libnei Ephraim. The Nasi of the tribe of Ephraim, he was the one that brought a Korban on Shabbos. What is the inyan of Shevet Ephraim? Shevet Ephraim, as we find in this week's Sedra, Ephraim is Miloshen Pru Uvu, Hifrani, Elikim Be'eretz Oni. Yosef named his son Ephraim, and he gave birth to him Mitzrayim, because the Rebishter has multiplied him Be'eretz Oni, in the land of poverty, which was to him in Mitzrayim, who was away from everybody. To him it was an exile. He was away from his father, away from his entire family, and the Rebbe has multiplied him there. So what does the concept of Ephraim stress? The concept of Ephraim stresses the inyan of Pru Uvu. The inyan, how one Yid gives birth to another Yid. Talking on Pru Uvu, here the Rebbe brings in the Chassidish interpretation. What does Pru Uvu mean? There's a famous word from the Alter Rebbe, that the first mitzvah in the Torah is Pru Uvu. Was meint das? Das meint as ein Yid should make another Yid.
Every Yid is responsible to see to it that he makes another Yid, and talking in the Ruchnisdike sense, that he brings another Yid close to the Eibishter. Or as the Rebbe expressed himself, I think it was last Shabbos, the Farbrengen, ein Yid soll machen noch a Yid, and ein Chassid should lead to it that you should become another Chassid. Now here in the interpretation of Pu'uvu, the Rebbe is going a step further. The Rebbe is saying not only does it mean utilizing influence on another person and seeing to it that the one that until now was strange from Yiddishkeit, he becomes close to the Eibishter, but the concept of Pu'uvu can be on the person himself as well. In other words, a Yid, by upgrading himself, by being Meisif in his own Avodah, he's also increasing. It's also an Inyan of Pu'uvu. He's also Meisif. He's increasing, and whatever level he was until now, he's achieving, he's coming to a higher Madrege. In other words, he's Meisif in Inyan in himself, which he did not have until now. Now, mentioning the Inyan of being Meisif in oneself, so the Rebbe asks, how does this agree? We know there's a concept, Loi Soisif, for Loi Sigra, that as far as mitzvahs, we know we have 613 mitzvahs, and we are not allowed to add on to the mitzvahs, or are we allowed to take off from the mitzvahs? In other words, we're supposed to be mekayim the mitzvahs exactly as we are told to. What are we saying? That a Yid is moisef, a Yid adds on. How does a Yid have an authority to be moisef, to add on? We know all we have to do is the Taryag mitzvahs HaTorah, not more than that. The Rebbe is bringing out that Bechlal we know that we have 613 mitzvahs. There are Taryag mitzvahs, and together with the Taryag mitzvahs, there are 7 mitzvahs derabanan, which in total is Tov Reish Chof, 620. In Aseres HaDibros, the total letters in Aseres HaDibros are 620 letters. Why are there 620 letters in Aseres HaDibros? This corresponds to the 613 mitzvahs and the 7 mitzvahs which were added on by the Chachamim. So right away we see that though there's an inyan of Lo Yosef or Lo Sigra that we're not allowed to add on to mitzvahs, we know this is the amount of mitzvahs which the Torah has given. At the same time, we see that right away in Aseres HaDibros we already have an indication for the 7 mitzvahs of the Rebbe. How do these two concepts agree? The Rebbe says that the Rebbe explains that what the Taich Lo Yosef or Lo Sigra, Lo Yosef, that we're not allowed to add on in mitzvahs, that's when we add on something and we say that it is a mitzvah deraisa. That's what the Isser stands for. However, when the Chachamim came along and the Chachamim saw it befitting to add on certain mitzvahs, as the mitzvah which we are in the middle of today, Chanukah. Chanukah is a mitzvah medivrei seifrim. Chanukah is a mitzvah medivrei seifrim. Purim is a mitzvah medivrei seifrim. The Rebbe says Purim, historically, in the sequence of events, Purim happened before Chanukah. But both of them are mitzvahs derabanan. Furthermore, the concept of mitzvahs derabanan traces way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu also introduced in Yonim, and whatever Moshe Rabbeinu introduced is also called a mitzvah medivrei seifrim if it's not mentioned specifically in Chumash. For example, the Rebbe says, the takana of reading Kriyas HaTorah, this is something which Moshe Rabbeinu instituted. And it's also not a min HaTorah mitzvah, it's a medivrei seifrim mitzvah, it's a midrabanan mitzvah. And all of this is included in the total inyan of mitzvahs which the Rebbe gave a Yid. However, the Rebbe says we notice something interesting. Just said that Aseres HaDibros has 620 letters. However, what are the last 7 letters? The last 7 letters is Asher L'Re'acha. These are the last two words of the Aseres HaDibros. Asher L'Re'acha, what is to your friend? What's the pshat? What is to your friend? In other words, 613 of the letters, these are mitzvahs which were given directly by the Rebbe. The last 7 letters, which these 7 letters indicate the 7 mitzvahs which the Rabbanan added on, this is merumez, this is hinted in what word? In the words Asher L'Reyacha, which is to your friend. In other words, this is something which the Chachamim, who are considered our friends, they are the ones that they have had added, they were the ones that introduced the additional 7 mitzvahs. So while mentioning that Asher L'Reyacha refers to the Chachamim, it also says, however, we also know that there's a Rashi, Masechta Shabbos, where Rashi there tells us that Re'acha, friend, is something which refers to the Rabbeinu Shalom as well. Rashi brings a pasuk, Re'acha, ve'reya avicha al taziv. Don't let go of your friend and your father's friend. Who does that friend refer to? Their friend refers to the Rebbe Shalom. That Rashi is Rabbi the Gemara. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us a famous story that the Gentile that came to, first he came to Shammai, then he came to Hillel and asked him that he should teach him the entire Torah on one foot. Until, what did Hillel tell him? Madaloch sani lachavroch lisavid. What is hated to you, you should not do to your friend. This is the entire Torah and everything else is an interpretation. So Rashi there gives an explanation. How can Avos Yisrael be the entire Torah, even regarding the mitzvahs of Bein Adam L'Makom? Maybe the mitzvahs of Bein Adam L'Chaveru we can understand, but mitzvahs of Bein Adam L'Makom, how can we say that Avos Yisrael is the Yesod, the foundation? Actually, what he told them was Avos Yisrael, that this is the foundation of the entire Torah, and everything else is an interpretation on this. So Rashi says, being that the Rebbe is also called friend, Re'acha ve'reya avicha al taziv, based on this pasuk. Therefore, when we live up to the concept of madaloch sani, what is hated upon you, don't do it to your friend, lachadroch leisavit, which in other words is Avos Yisrael. This is the yesod of the entire Torah. So again, getting back to our Inyan, the Rebbe brings a Rambam. The Rambam writes that in later generations, the Chachamim made Gzeiros, Usyogos, they had Gzeiros and boundaries and various introductions which they introduced to Torah. So we see that we beferish do find that in later generations the Chachamim saw a need to add on, to increase a certain inyan, but again, not that it gets a status of a mitzvah min ha-Torah, because this, chas v'shalom, this cannot be, because mitzvah min ha-Torah is le'sosifu v'le'sigru, exactly 613, no more and no less. However, the Chachamim, in every generation, when they see it befitting to add on that something has to be, there is something which they feel as a result of the generation that they're living in and for the benefit of the people, that something has to be introduced, it is definitely in the power of the Chachamim to do so. To such an extent that there's a famous expression in Chazal, Chamurim alai divrei soifrim. Mother says that Divrei Soifrim, which means mitzvahs, the Rabbanan, words of the scribes, but it was the Soifrim, the Chachamim, had certain times people felt that they were machmir. These Divrei Soifrim were chomor more than Divrei Torah. And there's another expression, Arevim alai Divrei Soifrim. There's a certain pleasantness, Orev meaning pleasant, from Divrei Seifrim, from the words of the Chachamim have added on, have introduced, Yesam Divrei Torah. So again, we see how dear and important the inyanim which the Chachamim have increased, how meaningful it is to every person. The Rebbe is concluding, when we're talking that every Yid, the whole idea of Pruvu is that a person should see to it that he should make another Yid, and at the same time also within himself, see to it that he adds on in Yonim in his own Derech HaAveda. He uplifts himself by increasing in his Derech HaAveda. And here the Rebbe brings in the whole Inyan of uplifting oneself is extremely suitable to Hanukkah. What do we find by Hanukkah? By Hanukkah we find an exception which we do not find by any other mitzvah. The Gemara discusses what is the proper way to observe Hanukkah. How do we have to tzend licht? So first the Gemara says, Neir ishu beisai. According to halacha, it's sufficient to light one licht of Hanukkah, one Hanukkah candle every single night. Then the Gemara says, Mahadrin would do different, everybody in the family would take part. Then the Gemara says, Mahadran, mina mahadran, those that really want to do the mitzvah perfect, and a level of mahadran, mina mahadran, really be mahadran on the mitzvah of Chanukah. Here the Gemara brings the two opinions between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And we naturally follow the halacha of Beis Hillel, which means that every night we increase one more than we did the previous night. So here in Chanukah we see a gewaldige Zach, something which we do not see in any other mitzvah. There are more paskins, and this is what Shulchan Aruch paskins, that each and every Jew comes Chanukah, how do we feel sich? We feel sich in a way of mahadran mina mahadran. The Meiler, when we're leaving Chanukah, what is the message that we take with us? From leaving Chanukah, the message that we take with us is that a Yid has to strive to keep on going higher, reach it. Because Chanukah, we are all the level of mahadran mina mahadran, and to take this concept along with him on the entire year, Meiler, once we go with such a path, with such an approach of mahadran min mahadran, then we will naturally see to it that we uplift our own self, and we are meisif, and we are adding on. And this is b'chlal in Chanukah. We find the whole union of Chanukah is mailam b'kodesh. Again, every night we do more than we did the previous night, which is the whole hayra which we derive from Chanukah. And the Rebbe said that is why he spoke with such a shturem, so forcefully, and during the entire week and before Chanukah, asking that we reach out with the message of Chanukah to everybody, because there's a tremendous message in Chanukah. And this is why the expression is also, when we're talking about Chanukah, we wish there should be a lichtike Chanukah. And this lichtigkeit of Chanukah, we should take along with us for the entire year, that this warmth, this inspiration that Chanukah gives us, we should take with us and carry it with us for the entire year. And here the Rebbe let in talking how Bechlal mitzvahs, every mitzvah has its medida v'hagbalah. In other words, every mitzvah has its limitation, its boundaries, how the mitzvah is to be fulfilled. Even something so major, like the concept of Kabbalah's oil, the general concept of accepting the yoke of the Rebishter, here too there are limitations. What's the pshat? There are limitations. We know that when it comes to an inyan of pikuach nefesh, that is when, in other words, it's a question of life or death. Chas v'shalom, in other words, it's a question of survival, it's a question of existence. Here we say that the entire Torah is pushed aside because of pikuach nefesh. What does this show us? Again, it shows us how dear a Yid is, how dear and precious a Yid is by the Eibishter. That the whole Torah and all the great inyanim that come with Torah are put aside when it's a question of saving a person's life. So again, what do we see? That all of Torah was given because of a Yid, and how dear and precious a Yid. Then the Rebbe continued, Bechlal, Chanukah, there's avodah of Chanukah, there's avodah of Shabbos. Nonetheless, Chanukah and Shabbos must always meet. In other words, we cannot have a Chanukah without a Shabbos. We can have a Chanukah with one Shabbos. We can have even a Chanukah with two Shabbos. But Chanukah and Shabbos must always meet. The question arises, apparently the avodah of Chanukah and the avodah of Shabbos are two contradictory avodas. Why? The avodah of Chanukah is al Pesach Beisei Mibachutz. What's the whole meaning of Chanukah? Chanukah, we keep on stressing that the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Chanukah is that the Ner Chanukah has to be placed at the door. In other words, to reach to the outside. The whole meaning of Chanukah is to reach out. To reach out to the Talmudoi, to the Meirei, to the one who is still on the level of rebelling. And what do we say? Chanukah, we reach out, we bring the lichtigkeit, we take the lichtigkeit that Chanukah has, and that we put at our door, stressing the point that we have to reach out to the outside. That's the whole meaning of Chanukah. Mentioning this Indian, so it says the question arises if somebody, he said it in an indirect way, if somebody walks in a midbar, somebody's in a desert, the question is, where should he light the Chanukah candles? Because in the desert there are no other people there, so there's no concept of Pesumei Nisa. Pesumei Nisa is only you want to attract others. Or the same thing, one who's sitting in a prison, how should he light Chanukah licht? But it says, let's hope that no Yid should have to be in prison. Prison is not a place of a Yid, for Yidden to be there. So therefore we wouldn't have this shaila about lighting Hanukkah candles there. We know that there's a halacha there, 4 that have to be thankful, 4 that have to bench goimel. 4 general categories of those that have to be bench goimel. One is the one who's freed from prison. The Rebbe says, let's not worry about that. We'll be able to solve that problem. that interpretation will be able to solve. And the main thing, that's not a place for a Yid. But regardless, getting back to our Inyan, what is the whole Hira of Chanukah? The Hira of Chanukah is to bring Lichtigkeit to the outside. The Rebbe has mentioned in his, I don't know if it was today, but previously already, that Chanukah brings Lichtigkeit to Goyim as well. During the week, one of the times he spoke, or was it last Shabbos or Sunday night, he did mention specifically that it does bring Lichtigkeit to Goyim as well. What is the inyan of Shabbos on the other hand? The whole inyan of Shabbos, how do we celebrate Shabbos? Shabbos we celebrate with Achila Shabbos, with the Sudas of Shabbos. The Gemara says, Gemara condemns a person that eats in the street. What does that show? The whole inyan of eating belongs indoors, belongs in the house. So when we say that we have a combination of Shabbos and Chanukah, it's 2 contradictory inyan. Shabbos is an in-house inyan, an indoor inyan. Chanukah is an outreach inyan, to reach out to the outside, to reach out to the street. Another word, a different word Rabbi is using. There is an avodah of kshoit atzmecha, and there's an avodah of kshoit acherim. There's an avodah of beautify yourself, and there's an avodah of beautify others. Bechlal, the Gemara says, the Gemara says, kshoit atzmecha, first beautify yourself, and then worry about others, then v'achakach kshoit acherim, and then take care of others. Here the Rebbe says there are times, however, when a person, for whatever reason, he's not successful in affecting his own self. However, he's successful in the avodah of kshoit acherim. And with himself, the Rebbe quoted a lashon, which we recite in the minor lashon when we go to the yoyel. One says that he has no koyach affecting his own self. However, to be successful in kshoit acherim, to be successful in reaching out to others, that he could. Memele, what is the uftu? When we say that, what is the accomplishment? When we say that Shabbos and Chanukah come together, it is that these 2 avodas come together. The avodah of taking care of oneself and the avodah of outreaching to other people. And Shabbos Chanukah combines both of these avodas. And Memele, Shabbos Chanukah gives koyach and strength that we should be able to fulfill both of these avodas. Side the avodah of kshoit atzmecha, aside the avodah of kshoit acherim, of beautifying others. And one avodah gives strength, gives koyach into the other avodah. Though he feels a weakness in one avodah, the other avodah gives him koyach. On one side, that a person should not close himself up in his own daled amis and say he will sit and learn and daven to himself, and he does not want to have no shaykhs to the outside world. So here comes in the indication of Chanukah. And Chanukah reminds us, no, this cannot be so. On the contrary, a person has the obligation of reaching out, al pesach beisay mibachutz, to reach out to the outside and bring lichtigkeit to the outside. And on the other hand, we are reminded that the one who is successful in kshoit acherim, here the kshoit acherim, the fact that he's involved with helping others, this in itself is an asinas koyach. This is a source of strength that he will be able to fulfill the other part of the avodah, which is kshoit atzmecha, that he shall beautify his own self as well. The Rebbe continued that Bechlal, this is the whole inyan of Chanukah. Chanukah is also meloshen chinuch. Meloshen chinuch, meloshen education. Just like then, it was an inyan of chinuch. It was a Chanukas of the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash was dedicated. Now we are applying the same word of chinuch, that Chanukah is a time to be concerned about chinuch of others, and as well, everyone being concerned about the chinuch of his oneself. Everyone has to be, we have to, the Rebbe always keeps on stressing that his chinuch, education, refers to others, and a person has to be himself mechanech as well. We have to upgrade ourselves as well. We have to keep on self-educating. We have to keep on educating ourselves. And Mela, this is how Chanukah is combining both of these avodas. Chanukah is combining the Shabbos Chanukah, stresses the Meila in Kshoit Atzmacha, and it's also stressing the Meila in Kshoit Acher. Rabbi continued that from this Shabbos Chanukah, we are going into Zois Chanukah, which is tomorrow. That is the last day of Chanukah. It's explained in Chassidus at length, many miles regarding this day of Zois Chanukah. That's the last and final day of Chanukah. And in the Kriyas HaTorah, what we read in the Torah of Zois Chanukah, every day we only read about one or two Nesiim, about two Korbanos. The Kriyas HaTorah, which we read tomorrow, is from Bayoim Hashmini on. From Bayoim Hashmini, in other words, we'll be reading about several Nesiim tomorrow, about several Korbanos which were brought tomorrow. And not only that, we will be going into Pashas Bahaloischa, which relates exactly how Aaron HaKohen lit the menorah. Which all of this are tremendous in Yon. This is on one hand. On the other hand, we find a Maila, a plus, an advantage in the first day of Chanukah, to such an extent that the first day of Chanukah is considered that is the day that includes, that's Koilel, that includes the entire Chanukah. In other words, the key to Chanukah is the first day. The Rebbe quoted the Gemara. The Gemara says, "B'Chafhei b'Kislev, on the 25th day of Kislev, Yom de Chanukah, days of Chanukah, Tmanya Inyan, there are 8." Now the simple meaning of Gemara is that is when the days of Chanukah begin, the 8 days of Chanukah. But again, every expression in Gemara is accurate. What does the Gemara say? B'Chafhei b'Kislev, on the 25th day of Kislev, that is when we have the days of Chanukah, the 8 days of Chanukah. What does this mean? That all of the 8 days of Chanukah are included in the first day. In other words, being that that's the first day, that's the Rosh for all the days, and therefore it includes the entire week of Chanukah, the entire 8 days of Chanukah. And on the other hand, it's brought out that there are a lot of advantages, a lot of milas in the last day of Chanukah. The Rebbe brought out that's the pshat Oz. It's brought in, see this expression Oz. Oz is composed of 2 letters, Aleph Zayin. What does this show? It shows from 2, again, what we just spoke. Could be there's a mile on the first day, and could be there's a mile on the last day. Aleph and Zayin equal 8. Altogether, we get the 8 days of Chanukah. But what do we see? We see that Zayin goes separate and Aleph goes separate. So we see there's a mila like in the first day, as opposed to the rest of the 7 days. And on the other hand, we could say that there's a mila in the last day. That is the Inyan of Zois Chanukah, as opposed to the first 7 days of Chanukah. So Mamela, what's the uftu? What do we say? Oz is stressing the mila of the last day of Chanukah, as opposed to the first 7 days, which this is the day of Zois Chanukah. The Rebbe also referred, Rebbe says it's customary always to refer to the Parsha of the week. And this week's Seder is Parshas Miketz.
The Rebbe refers to what the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah. Rebbe always refers to Torah as the Chassidische Parsha. We have the regular Seder and we have the Chassidische Seder. The Chassidische Seder is an interpretation of Torah. The Mamar of the Alter Rebbe. And there he refers to the pasuk of Vayhi Miketz Shnosayim Yomim. What does Shnosayim Yomim mean? 2 years. So he explains 2 years refers to 2 drachim in Avodas Hashem. Every neshama comes down into this world, and every neshama is confronted with Shnosayim Yomim. What's the pshat Shnosayim Yomim? There's an avodah of Ava, there's an avodah of Yira. There are dual in Yonim that Shnosayim that are involved regarding the neshama that comes down into this world. And it's in the way of Shnosayim Yomim, as it's explained at length in Torah in the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe also referred to the Rashi. What does Rashi say on Vayhi Miketz? Miketz meaning an end. And the Rebbe came in, what do we mean when we say an end? A ketz, a soif. That's already the furthest point that should be an end to the Golus. And the Rebbe should take us out of Golus, bring Mashiach, take us out of Golus. And that's the whole union of Miketz. Miketz, an end to the Golus. We've been enough in Golus, and let Mashiach come and put an end to all this. It was an expression, let Mashiach come, so that even in a way that the 8th day of Chanukah
we will already celebrate together with Mashiach. Talking about the kindling of the menorah, which went on in the Beis HaMikdash, I mentioned the question if menorah was lit on Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi says that there are two opinions on Poskim. There's one opinion that the menorah was lit only every evening. So if we say that the menorah was lit in the evening, then we're not necessarily, it had to be lit on Shabbos. It could have been lit Friday evening, could have been lit again Motzei Shabbos. However, the Rambam's opinion is that not only was the menorah lit in the evening, the Rambam paskins that the menorah was lit every morning, Baboiker as well. So if the menorah was lit in the had to be lit every morning, then naturally it was lit Shabbos as well. Here at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was talking about V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol miyodecha. How we are to serve the Rebishter with whatever we have. B'chol miyodecha. So see, this explains at length based on Chazal. What's the pshat ma'oid, that we are to serve the Rebishter with ma'oid really meaning beli gvul, with whatever unlimited measures, whatever we can only approach, involve in effect to serve the Rebishter. That's what we have to do. However, there's another opinion in Chazal that teaches was heißt of v'chol ma'idcha or v'chol me'moindcha, with all your money. In other words, that you should be ready to spend money for Inyanim whenever needed. So the Rebbe combined this, and the Rebbe brought in a story from the Tzemach Tzedek that is brought in the Sichos from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the Tzemach Tzedek, when he would learn, would be deeply involved in learning. He would many times keep coins in front of him, keep money in front of him, and play like with the coins while he was learning. And the interpretation for this was given that in order that it should poil, it should affect a hachave, to broaden his mind, so the fact that he would be playing with gold coins or silver coins, this had an effect on him, that it created a hachave in the mind of the Tzemach Tzedek, which was needed when he wanted to learn. Because when one learns, naturally hachave is something that broadens his mind, so he understands better the learning. So that, for this reason, the Tzemach Tzedek would have coins in front of him, gold pieces or silver pieces in front of him, while he was learning. In fact, in the Frierdiker Rebbe Sicha, where he brings this custom of the Tzemach Tzedek, he also brings it that one of, I don't recall offhand, but somebody from the way previous generations also had the same minig, that while learning, in order to create a hachave within himself, to broaden his mind, he would also have this habit of taking gold coins and playing with them while he was learning. This is what the Rebbe is teaching. With money, how we can serve the Rebishter in such a way, like the Tzemach Tzedek utilized playing with coins, so this affected that his learning Torah was at a higher level, at a much broader level, so he was able to understand Torah deeper and better. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen with a very strong request that we utilize the remainder of Chanukah. Remainder of Chanukah, which is tonight and tomorrow. The Rebbe says that we should reach out with this message. Shabbos, he says, we can't. Shabbos, we are limited in contacting others. However, after Shabbos, we can reach out to the entire world. And that the Rebbe urged that we reach out to everybody, that tomorrow's day, tonight and tomorrow, should be utilized to see to it that every Yid, this is how the Rebbe expressed himself, that every Yid is affected with the warmth of the Chanukah licht. In other words, that the message of Chanukah is brought to each and every Yid. Interesting, after Meirer and after lighting the Chanukah menorah in 770, the Rebbe again turned around and the Rebbe said a few short words. The contents of it was, again, the Rebbe said he's reminding again on the Indian which we spoke during the Farbrengen, that the whole entire Indian of Chanukah is al Pesach Beisai Mibachutz. The whole Indian of Chanukah is to reach out to the outside, to reach out and bring the lichtigkeit of Chanukah to the outside. This, the Rebbe said, will lead to the coming of the Geula, which at that time it will be lichtig misoifa eilam va'at soifai. The time when Mashiach will come, then it will be, the world will be illuminated from one end of the world to the other end of the world. A gute Woche and a freiliche Chanukah.